Okay, welcome everyone to this evening's event. Welcome to the National Library of Scotland. My name is Chris Castles, I'm the Head of Archives and Manuscript Collections here at the Library. We've got a packed programme of speakers, as you can see, so we're going to start quite promptly. I was going to say a few words around some housekeeping matters, but before I get to that, just to say we're really delighted to be hosting this event tonight. And we're delighted to become the home of the Ainslie Archive, which joins the Records of the Scottish Campaign to Resist the Nuclear Menace, and becomes really a major resource for the study of the anti-nuclear movement in Scotland. So the library has extensive collections relating to peace activism, anti-militarism, from papers of figures like John Maclean, Richie Calder, Arthur Woodburn, to the William Gallagher Memorial Library and Jenny Buchan Political Song Collection, both previously held in Glasgow. Last year, we received a grant from the National Archives, the Pilgrim Trust and the Wilson Foundation to catalogue some of the National Library's previously hidden archives of women's involvement in the anti-nuclear and peace movements in Scotland. These collections include the papers of Beth Junor, relating to her time at the Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp, the papers of author Joan Lingard, author and founder of the Scottish Writers Against the Bomb, and the records of the Scottish branch of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Some of this material you'll be able to see alongside a selection from the Ainslie Archive in the display just prior to this evening's talk. Without further ado, I think I'll pass over to Lynn, who's kindly hosting. Before I do, just to say, if anyone has a mobile phone, if you could please turn it to silent or turn it off. There's no fire alarm scheduled for this evening, so if the alarm does sound, you can just make your way back out the door and out onto George Forth Bridge. And lastly, we close at 7 p.m, so I always appreciate if once the event's finished, if people can kind of make a prompt departure to let the staff lock out. With that said, I'll hand over to Lynn. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. So I'm Lynn Jimison. Currently got the privilege to be the chair of Scottish Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. John Ainslie worked for Scottish CND. When he started working for us, he was already a well-known peace activist, known to Fastlane Peace Camp, and you'll hear more about that from our wonderful panel of speakers who are going to speak about his work. But he was already a conscientious objector. He had been ordained as a minister, having left the armed forces, and then gone on to another career, and then he had to leave that because he was taking part in non-violent direct action and was not prepared to say that he wouldn't do anything illegal. So then he came to us, and we were very, very grateful and are very pleased to be celebrating his work and legacy. So I'm just going to introduce the speakers. I'll introduce them, I think, as they speak, rather than making you try to remember them all from the very beginning. I just also want to thank you very much for being here and for sharing this with us, and to note that there are also, there's a number of quite active peace activists in the room of varying sorts, and so there will be, I hope, time for discussion and for you maybe to make contributions. So I'm going to start with Jane Tallons. Jane, Jane, it's maybe better if you introduce yourself. So Jane's very well known to all of us in the peace movement because of her work through Nuke Watch and through Fastlane Peace Camp and many other things.
Right, press the button. There's an awful lot of pressing buttons today. Okay, I'm Jane Tallons. I live at Fastlane Peace Camp, and has also been involved in coordinating Nuke Watch, tracking nuclear weapons convoys, Trident Plowshares, Fastlane 365. And Vice Chair Scottish CND for a bit there. So kind of in the peace movement, very much the direct action kind of side of things. So I moved to Fastlane Peace Camp in 1984. The Cold War was on everyone's mind, and there were CNG groups all over Scotland, and places like Edinburgh had loads and loads of groups. The MOD had just announced the ageing Polaris submarines were going to be replaced by Trident, and the Clyde bases would expand hugely to accommodate them. So John and Alison Ainslie from Easterhouse CND were regular visitors to the camp. John was a community minister in Easterhouse then. Their son Duncan was born in 1988, and he would come along with them and join my two boys and any other kids around in the wee gang that had lots of wild fun around the camp as us adults tried to hatch plans to hold off a nuclear disaster. The MOD as an institution was extremely secretive, even more so than now. I'm hearing that's going back the way. It wasn't that they wouldn't tell the public things. A lot of the time they just denied that they even existed. And remember, at this point, we had no freedom of information stuff, we had no internet, it was just what we could see. So Fastlane Peace Camp was right there on the spot alongside the A814 inside of Fastlane Base. So every vehicle going to the base passed by us, and every vessel that came up the Gaelic was kind of just on the beach, just nearby. We got over 20 residents at the time, and we could monitor base activity from the camp on the nearby beach, as well as a lot of running off through the hills and keeping an eye on things. A well-thumbed old copy of Jane's fighting ships, not my fighting ships, but Jane's fighting ships, sat in our communal caravan, and some would-be train spotters among us could identify every submarine that passed by. You know who you are, Jim. In 1990, CND started getting these anonymous notes through the post that seemed to be saying there were cracks in the pipework taking the coolant to and from the reactor on the submarines. And it took a while to try and decipher what this was all about. So after a lot of legwork, John Ainslie, along with Jim Chestnut and Phil Jones and others at the camp, published that first report, Cracking Under Pressure. It involves a lot of searching Hansard and newspaper archives. We looked at the public newsletters of the contractors at Barrow and Devonport and Navy News, all these bits of information. And we tied it in with our eyewitness reports from Fastlane and the other naval establishments. And it became clear that running these very expensive and complicated bits of military hardware, especially the well past the sell-by date ones, posed risks for the crew and everyone downwind of a potential radioactive release. Raising these issues in Cracking Under Pressure was the first of many reports that John was involved in writing, and that informed the debate about the UK's nuclear weapons and why we should disarm. By 1992, John started work at Scottish C&D, and everybody was making plans for the arrival of the first Trident submarine, HMS Vanguard. It came up from Barrow, where it's built. We had a Trident alert network to get lots of people to come when it arrived and protest along shore. But we also had Clyde Sea Action, and John joined the Clyde Sea Action in his kayak, and they went out on the water and hindered the arrival of HMS Vanguard as it came through the Rue Narrow on the way up the Gale. There's a bit where there's a spit goes out, it's very narrow. I've got some good pictures, all the boats, kayaks, everybody out there, the police boats, it's kind of mayhem, but it certainly slowed things down. Some of us lived with a radio scanner always in the background of our lives, and we picked up lots of interesting radio chatter about the boats that are out there, about the police that were getting ready for convoys to come. And we knew when a submarine was on the move. And although the MOD liked to think that everything to do with the nuclear submarine fleet was very secret, by then we had children, and the gossip at the local playgroup and the school gates took no notice of the Official Secrets Act. And in fact, you could just overhear really interesting conversations in the aisles of the local supermarket. And John excelled at gathering all this information, all these snippets, all these pieces of the jigsaw, and collating it and working out what was going on, or at least identifying what questions needed to be asked. Another part of the nuclear chain was the transport of the warheads from AWE Burfield down near Reading to RNAD Coolport, and the next lock over from Fastlane. And we set up Newport as a network to track the convoys, and lots of people were on our phone tree, and if they spotted it, they'd have to dash to the nearest phone box and report their sightings in so we could alert the next people on the route. The arrival of mobile phones made this all much easier. As the convoy then travelled in stages over 3 days, we would assemble a great protest waiting for it, often at Balloch, at the southern end of Loch Lomond, and John would come out and join us, where we'd non-violently bring the convoy to a halt, and you've got a video camcorder and you'd film the action. It was felt like the bit where you can really stand in front of the bomb and say, okay, you have to move me first if you're going to proceed. 28 years ago this week, John and I, along with some others, were dressed as International Court of Justice judges and briefly blocked the passage of the weapons convoy in Balak to mark the ICJ issuing its advisory opinion on the illegality of nuclear weapons. As the 90s rolled on and CND membership fell, I became a vice chair of Scottish CND, and John and I, with Brian Quell, communicated regularly with the groups that were still active and thought up campaigns and activities to keep the movement visible. But from those early days in the 80s, the potential for research with now access to so much more information with the internet, it's changed everything dramatically. Researchers, journalists, whistleblowers, activists can now communicate instantly. But still, however, so much is hidden behind this smokescreen of national security, and finding out what is going on sometimes means that we have to leave the office and look up from the screens and go out there and bear witness to what is actually going on. The imperative to keep the UK nuclear weapons deployed no matter what has always meant taking risks, and the military and the politicians keep those risks with our eyes very secret. Having nuclear weapons based here puts us all at risk, and there's nothing to suggest that any other nuclear state with them doesn't have the same problems. The dangers John highlighted in his reports are still there, and the danger to the whole world, if they're ever used, is now more pertinent than ever.
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane, indeed. So we're now moving on to Veronica Liebscher, and Veronica worked with John and is going to tell us about that.
So the archive here at the library is a testament to John's qualities.
Have we got the microphone?
Press the button.
That's it.
Technology. The archive here is a testament to John's qualities as a meticulous and tenacious researcher and to his intellectual achievement. So we're going to hear a lot about that, so I'm going to talk about something else. I was lucky enough to work closely with John, and I was proud to be able to call him my friend. Put me in an ideal position to enjoy the humour and creativity that he brought to campaigning. Most people here will know that he created Big Sandy and then Cindy, who was Sandy's girlfriend. But there were lots of other creative exploits, large and small, along the years. For example, he converted a push bike into a submarine. He made a video of peas, making a peace symbol. He did another video with money going through a shredder. It wasn't real money, it was photocopied. CND didn't have enough. And he went to tea in the park and slept in a tent surrounded by mud. He was an opportunist when it came to campaigning. I said at Parliament that barely a week goes by when I don't wish he was here to put a public figure or a news report right on some technical matter. Equally, barely a week goes by when I don't see something in the news and think John would have used that to make a good campaigning point. He embraced modern technology and he could see the value of Facebook and Twitter to reach a wider audience. He and I both administered a number of accounts, and we developed this routine of tweeting and quoting each other's content to amplify it artificially. It's a bit of a niche entertainment, but we both enjoyed it. I'm sorry he didn't live to see further social media developments, and I'm sorry he's not here to teach me how to use TikTok. As a result of his illness during the last year, I often acted as his driver, most memorably following the nuclear convoys you've been hearing about. So generally through the central belt of Scotland and in the dark. On one occasion we were driving through Glasgow in the dark, and we could see the convoy ahead of us, and the roadworks came up, and we didn't know what was going to happen. Well, what happened was the convoy went through the roadworks, and then they brought all the cones out and put them out in front of us and separated us. Well, giving up wasn't an option. I mean, I might have been quite happy to go home at that stage, but he wasn't. He coolly directed me down all these side roads and alternative routes, and finally we caught up with the convoy again. Calm passenger, slightly afraid driver. Another time, he wanted to visit Coalport to see if the convoy was there in the compound. You can climb up and look down. Well, we started off at Loch Level, and the MOD sent out a launch for a closer look at us, but all they could see was a pair of lunatics who were paddling in the loch in February. And then eventually we went up to the mountain, and we got to the top and looked down, and he got his photographs, and then we went to have smoked fish in the pub on the way home. He was really good at combining serious work with fun. Late one night in May 2016, we were waiting for the convoy on a motorway bridge in southern Scotland. It was cold and dark, and the convoy was taking quite a while to get there. So while we were waiting, we got a bit bored, and we started practicing salsa steps together. So inevitably, while we were dancing on the bridge, the lorries started to appear and we nearly missed them to take photographs. That's one of my last and best memories. So that's the one I'm going to leave you with too. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And just in case anyone doesn't know, Sandy and Cindy are like 9 feet high puppets that go out on campaigning, usually, well, at that time, often with John inside Sandy. So we're now moving on to Rob Edwards, who will possibly be well known to you as a journalist who's been working away, writing very interesting stories for many years and is co-founder of The Ferret.
Thank you, Lynn. So I'm delighted to be here to pay tribute to John Ainslie and to mark the occasion of his archive coming to the National Library of Scotland. I'm very grateful for the National Library for taking his archive. I think it's great, it's what libraries should do. And as a sidetrack, I mean, aren't libraries wonderful?
Yay!
I mean, aren't they absolutely wonderful?
Yay.
All that knowledge and all those books for free. I mean, yeah, so thank you to the library. Also, thank you for the organisers, to Lynn and others, and Janet for getting us all together. I mean, I had a slight anticipation this might be the case before I came here, but for me, this is easily the greatest collection of nuclear nerds I've ever been to. And it really is good. Of course, there's only one nuclear nerd missing, and that's who we're here to celebrate. As Liv mentioned, I've been writing about nuclear matters for more than 40 years, for all sorts of publications, and most recently for The Ferret. And, you know, without sources, without contacts, without researchers, journalists are nothing. And I've relied very heavily on sources, and none more so than John. I tried to count the number of stories I relied on him or quoted him in, and I lost count. I mean, it's scores, maybe 100 over the years. And I'm just going to highlight 3 of them. Apologies if you were at the Parliament this morning, you've already heard this. And if you watched the video, it's a bit repetitive, but anyway. So just 3 stories which John was vital to me. The first one was in 2009, and where I and others were organising an investigation for The Guardian and Channel 4 News, and John was crucial in advising us what freedom of information requests to make to whom. And one of the requests we made was to the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, the Scottish Government's Green Watchdog, asking about radioactive leaks at Faz Lane. And as a result, we discovered and published stories and broadcast stories on the telly that there had been leaks of radioactive coolants from nuclear submarines into the Clyde on 3 occasions in 2004, 2007 and 2008. In 2010, the second instance, John was crucial in helping me and others challenge the Ministry of Defence refusal to release annual safety reports on nuclear weapons. It went to the Information Tribunal. John wrote a long report to help the case, for which I paid him nothing. And in the end, after a lot of to and fro, we won a surprise victory with a U-turn by the MOD, who released their internal regulators' annual safety reports on nuclear weapons, which revealed a series of problems with the nuclear weapons, but particularly a lack of properly trained nuclear engineers. I wrote about it for the Observer, and many others wrote stories about it. And that freedom of information victory resulted in the MOD releasing the annual safety reports for about 10 years of nuclear weapons, the reports written by their own regulators, until in 2017 they suddenly stopped, and the reports all became secret again. My colleague who's speaking next, Peter on my left, spent a lot of time and tenacity trying to challenge that, but unfortunately was successfully resisted by the MOD. So in other words, John helped temporarily force the MOD out of its secret citadel into the light, but now it's retreated back into the dark. And I think there's no really convincing explanation of that, but you know, it was nice to have a bit of light for a bit of time, and that was thanks to John. The last story, which may be familiar to you, was in 2015. There was a front page splash on the Sunday Herald, which I was working for at the time, the opening, the intro to which said, Trident submarines are plagued by serious security lapses, beset by multiple blunders, and a disaster waiting to happen, according to a nuclear weapons engineer turned whistleblower now being hunted by the police. You may remember the whistleblower's name was William McNeely. He was subsequently arrested and dishonorably discharged by the Royal Navy. Now, none of this, it was a big story at the time, none of this would have been revealed if it hadn't been for John. And as I said this morning at lunchtime, there's one very simple reason for that. John read his emails. I mean, maybe all of us don't always do that, but he really read his emails because McNeely had sent a very long report to me and to John and to several others. But it was John who grasped its significance. He called me, he said, you've got to read this, and I read it, and you know, I immediately decided we had to check it out. We didn't know whether it was true or that McNeely was real or not, so I had to put it to the Ministry of Defence, and we waited 3 or 4 days that week, I remember very clearly, beginning to doubt whether McNeely was for real or wondering. But late on the Friday night, the MOD got back to me and said, confirmed that he had been a submariner and had absconded, thereby confirming the story, so it then ran. And none of that would have happened if it hadn't been for John's diligence. And his diligence is one of the best things I remember about him. He cared about facts, accuracy and honesty, really cared about them. And as a journalist, obviously, I really valued that. I'll end on a wee personal note as well as his diligence. Others have made this observation. I was in awe of his diffidence. He never promoted himself. One of the problems about being a journalist is you come across a lot of people who promote themselves or want to promote themselves. And generally speaking, I don't want to talk to them. But John was not like that at all. He was not bothered about being quoted. Was keen to get across what he discovered or the messages he wanted to promote. But it wasn't about him. It was about the issue. He was very self-effacing, a little shy, perhaps, and never sought the limelight. And I think, you know, these days that's a quality to be treasured.
Thanks very much, Rob. So we're now moving on to Peter Burt that Rob mentioned. Our last 3 speakers have all either currently are connected with the Nuclear Information Service or have got some connection. Peter's had some connection, and he's also worked with Drone Wars and Keep Space for Peace. And so anyway, he's going to now talk to us about John. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And thank you too to the National Library for hosting us this evening. And how lovely it is to see so many friendly, familiar faces tonight. Thank you all for coming. So, I'm Peter Burt. I used to work for Nuclear Information Service at the end of the 2000s and beginning of the 2010s. And I knew John through the support and help that he gave to Nuclear Information Service at that time. So we're here tonight to celebrate John's archive, and I was looking through my own archive a few months ago, and I found this document. It's just a single sheet, it's undated, but it's probably from the early 2000s. It looks like it's a page from some kind of report, and it simply has the title, John Ainslie Biography. So I'd like to read it to you. John Ainslie served in the ranks in the Black Watch from 1971 to 1974 in Hong Kong and Northern Ireland. He then studied international relations at Keele University, graduating with a 2.1 honours. As part of the degree, he wrote a dissertation on the debate on NATO nuclear strategy. While at university, he was commissioned firstly into the Territorial Army, then as a cadetship officer in the Intelligence Corps. After graduating, he attended Sandhurst, then served again in Northern Ireland. In 1980, he left the army as a conscientious objector after appearing in front of the Tribunal for Conscientious Objectors. After leaving the army, he worked as a youth worker for the church in Easterhouse, Glasgow, for 2 years. He then studied divinity at Glasgow University and was ordained in the Church of Scotland. He worked for 5 years as community minister in Easterhouse. While a minister, he became involved in protests at the Faslane nuclear base. Since 1991, he has been employed as coordinator of the Scottish campaign for nuclear disarmament. He was arrested for canoeing in front of both the first two Trident submarines when they arrived in Scotland. He has organised a range of anti-nuclear demonstrations in Scotland. He has also played an important role supporting the work of the Scottish Coalition for Justice Not War, which organised protests against the war in Iraq. He has written the following reports: Cracking Under Pressure, 1992, The Safety of Trident, 1994, and Trident, Britain's Weapon of Mass Destruction, 1998. So here was a still relatively young man with considerable military and intellectual capability, who suddenly underwent a seismic change in his outlook and left the military to dedicate his life to build peace and disarmament in his own community and globally. Not only did he do that, but he did it in the most dramatic and effective way by using all the skills that he had learnt through his intelligence work in the armed forces to expose the secret and embarrassing information which is at the absolute heart of state power. Now, I was at a conference earlier this week in London where senior figures in the Ministry of Defence, their Defence Nuclear Organisation, were talking about the current Strategic Defence Review and the UK's government plans for its nuclear weapons. And they made no secret that their aspiration is to ramp up the nuclear programme to a pitch even greater than it was in the Cold War. That gone forever is any talk of a world free of nuclear weapons, and the government clearly intends to hang on to its nuclear weapons permanently if it can. And the talk was all about threats from our adversaries, Russia and China, and contests with them which we must win. Now, John had no time for this toxic, masculine version of the world. Now, more than ever, I think, we need to be inspired by John's talents and his energy. And fortunately for us, we still have John's papers, which are a huge resource of information to help us understand and navigate and expose the fatal flaws in the UK government's nuclear doctrine. So John, wherever you are, thank you very much for your legacy. I'm delighted that we have it to help us as we carry on your vital mission to help rid the world of nuclear weapons. Thank you so much, John.
Okay, fine. Tim, I'm going to ask you to speak next. So Tim Street from the Nuclear Information Service. We've heard Nuclear Information Service mentioned several times. I want to make it very clear that they were, along with the National Library of Scotland, the lead organisers of this event, and Scottish C&D is part of it, but not the lead. And actually Trish with them at the back here was probably the main coordinator and the two people up on the stage. But so thank you to Trish, along with Janet here as well. Okay, so Janet Fenton, who's Secretary of Scottish C&D. So, Tim, over to you.
Do I need a mic or can you hear me okay?
I think you should have a mic.
It says I do. Don't worry, I was watching this. Hi everyone. Thanks for coming. Good to see you all. So I'm going to talk about what the archive contains a bit, partly because I spent a few years digitising it with Ellis, who's not here today, but he also works on it. So, as we've heard, as well as taking part in campaigning and direct action to support disarmament, John was an authoritative and internationally respected nuclear researcher. So the contents of his archive reflect his many different research interests and the complexities involved in studying nuclear weapons and disarmament. The archive itself contains thousands of documents, primarily relating to the UK's nuclear weapons programme that he collected over several decades. So the information derives from a wide range of sources, some of which you can see or could have seen on the tables at the end. I hope you've had a look. They include official US and UK files, correspondence with activists and governments, and many other different types of people. Civil society reports, some of which aren't available now, so they're quite important because things get lost either online or in real life in material sense, they're not available anymore. Photographs, graphs, newsletters, and media articles. So as I say, we at NIST have been working since around 2021, late 2021, on digitising the documents, that means scanning them all in the archive so they're freely accessible to you online. So over 3,500 items have been uploaded to the dedicated online library, and each of those items, some of them are quite long. So I've just realised that talking to some of you that there was a lot of scanning, most of which I've kind of put in my own mental vault and forgotten about the hours of time that I spent trying to scan things. And some of them I made mistakes on. So if you come across a file which has a bit of a blooper or an error, do email us and say, I can't read this, it's fine, I won't take it personally. You might also need to rotate them. Some of them upside down. Apologies if you come across one of them. That's probably my bad. So the wide range of documents John collected form the basis of his research outputs. So really what the stuff in the archive is kind of is like a pyramid, or like I suppose like more like an iceberg. Like his reports are just like the tip of the iceberg. The research in the archive really shows you the range of reasoning, the range of interests he had that enabled him to produce this really sharp, directed, very concise, but also to the point research outputs, which we've heard about. Were very kind of focused and really apposite to the problems he identified. So, as we've heard, he authored around 20 reports on nuclear policy, which we've gathered also in one place on his website, and he started, as James said, in 1992 with Cracking on the Pressure about defects in British nuclear submarine reactors. I've written a list of the many other topics he wrote on in his reports, and it's a long list. It's very varied. I mean, where he found the time to actually look in depth at each of these issues is incredible. So there are things like how Britain relies on the US to maintain its nuclear status, the practicalities of British nuclear disarmament and Scotland's vital contribution to the endeavour, the costs and risks of the UK's nuclear weapons modernisation programme, ongoing technical problems of the UK's nuclear-powered submarines, calculations made by top UK strategists concerning how to target Russia with nuclear weapons during and after the Cold War, the real purpose of the many nuclear weapons-rated sites in the UK, both British and American, but are shrouded in secrecy, the humanitarian consequences of the use of nuclear weapons by the UK, and preparations in the 1980s defence in the event of a nuclear attack on Britain. And again, this is just to name a few. And all these are painstaking research, painstakingly footnoted and referenced, and at a very high level of discussion that allowed him to actually have, as we've heard, like leverage and access to decision makers and historians in the military and civil society, which is testament to the quality of the research in each of the topics. So I also found the Ainslie archive interesting as it kind of provides a unique insight into how he approached the issues he worked on. And clearly it was driven by, his investigations were driven by a belief that there must be public debate and understanding of national security matters. And this is really what drove him so that people could participate or understand decision making beyond Whitehall and the usual elites of the defence establishment. So NIS hopes that providing a platform for John's work today will allow researchers and a curious layperson to better understand our own nuclear history and decision making, so we know how and why things are like they are now. And as Peter said, try to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, but obviously we don't have so much wisdom in the corridors of power. So yeah, we believe it's vital to prevent the nuclear past and all its dangers from being forgotten. To help you through the maze, which it sometimes can be in the archive, we've written a blog and introductory guide, which are on the Ainslie Archive webpage, so you can hopefully access it more easily and navigate the kind of topics that he gathered information on. And we identified a few different thematic areas in his research, which we've provided a few different articles and documents on, and it's been useful to chat with some of you to kind of find out how we could refine and hone that, because not only do we have to upload all the documents, but then we have to find a way of presenting them and kind of helping people find their way through them, which is not always easy. So probably after this, as a result of some of the chats I've had with you, that we'll probably tweak it again, because we've only really just launched it in its state 1.0, so we'll probably do a few other iterations and make it more accessible for you guys. To conclude, John Ainslie worked tirelessly to bring democracy, transparency and accountability to the UK's nuclear weapons programme. His work remains vital, particularly if disarmament is to return to the political agenda. The recent meetings of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or the Nuclear Ban Treaty, show the international appetite for disarmament action. As the UK continues with its nuclear rearmament programme, it is therefore important to revisit John Ainslie's work. For example, in the lead up to the planned renewal of the Mutual Defence Agreement, NIS will advocate for parliamentary scrutiny and public discussion of the agreement. That's the main agreement, as David will explain to you maybe a bit more, between the UK and US, which allows cooperation on the development of nuclear weapons. And David published a report on this earlier this year, which he actually probably will discuss. I was going to say he's going to update it because there's been developments with it. You'll talk about that. This is also continuing the spirit of John's work by publishing research on the UK's nuclear warhead and other areas, and we hope you and everyone else using the archive find it as valuable and inspiring as we have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to David Cullen, who is also speaking from the Nuclear Information Service and is going to talk about the kind of ongoing relevance of John's work. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Do you have a clicker for me?
Yes. Ah, right. This one's set up for the film.
It should just go straight on.
Thank you.
Hey. Thank you so much to everybody for coming and to the library for hosting. It's always a real pleasure to hear the personal reflections about John. I didn't have the honour of working with him. I started doing this job just in the last year of his life, so I never interacted with him, but it was a pleasure to hear what a nice and fun guy he seemed to be, as well as a really amazing, excellent researcher. So as you know, we've come to the end of our project of digitising the archive. It's been a huge project and it's taken a very long time. My thanks to all of the NIST staff who worked on it, Trish who coordinated, Tim who did a huge amount of work, and also Ellis who flowered you. And also we should thank Scottish CMD and the Lansbury House Trust, and also some very generous individual donors whose generosity enabled that work. So at Nuclear Information Service, we try and carry on the kind of work that John was doing in his life, and I just want to give some examples of that. And I hope I'll show that the archive is not a historical record, it's a live, accessible, extraordinarily valuable resource for anybody who wants to understand the UK nuclear weapons programme in the past, but also what's happening currently. So some direct examples. This is the last report that John wrote, the Trident Shambles. which is about issues with delivering nuclear weapons upgrades. We have written this report, Trouble Ahead, which ploughs very much the same furrow, but updates some of the information, and we've gone back to that since we wrote it because it's very much a live issue. This here is Assuring Destruction Forever, so that's a publication by WILPF, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which has chapters on the nuclear weapons programs of the different states. John wrote several versions of the UK chapter of this. This is, I think, the last one that he wrote, and this is just a really incredible document. I go back to this personally often when I'm writing something about the UK warhead because it's hands down the best resource on it. So you can see this report that we've written, which is about the incoming new warhead, but a lot of the material talking about the current warhead and its current configuration is drawn from John's work in this in Assuring Destruction Forever. This report here, Trident Know Where to Go. I'm not showing you something that NIST has published about this because this is a really foundational, amazing document about the struggles that the UK would have were the fast lane base to not become available to them. We haven't gone back to this topic because I don't think it needs revisiting from what John's written here. It remains somewhat authoritative about re-examining the archival documents when the government was looking at basing the UK submarines, and I think it still stands up today. And I think it's also, my sense is that it's really filtered into the thinking around this issue. I often get people, when I'm discussing this issue, bringing up the fact that the government really has nowhere else to site the submarines, and were they're not to be allowed to stay in fast lane, they would struggle to site them anywhere. Of course, as Tim said, the archive is very much not just the finished reports that John created, but the vast majority of it is this incredible wealth of source material that he used. And I'm just going to give two examples, and these are real examples. So Tim was discussing this briefing we've just published on mutual defence agreements. That's the major treaty that governs the US-UK nuclear special relationship. That treaty we've discovered actually just after we published this, it's due to be renewed this year. We thought they might do a minor update. They're actually going to make it permanently or indefinitely in effect. So we will be updating that briefing in due course to reflect the proposed changes. But in the course of researching this document, I spend a lot of time looking for something that I sense might be out there that would be a useful source for whatever I'm writing. And since we have digitised this archive and put it online, I found that I go out there looking for something and I find that actually the thing I'm looking for is in the archive on our website. John gathered all this amazing stuff together, so you can see up here the Peace Rights legal opinion on the legality of the Mutual Defence Agreement. It was commissioned by several peace organisations in 2004. There's a copy of that in the archive on our website. This article by Richard Moore, who some of us know, about the transfer of, I suppose, sort of design heritage of nuclear warheads in the period there. So after the Mutual Defence Agreement was signed, the UK got access to suddenly all of the US warhead designs, and this is an article about to what extent they immediately started copying US designs, or whether there was a transfer of information between the two. So these are both sources that are used in there that I was just Googling stuff that I thought might be useful, and hey ho, here it is on the archive. So it's an amazing resource that I hope will be useful to lots of other people. We've had researchers from America and from Australia getting in contact with us and saying that they're already finding it useful. So I hope you get as much out of it as I do. Both the digital and the physical archive and the library are both amazing resources, and I hope they help to increase the body of knowledge and the opposition to nuclear weapons in this country. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much, David. So I'm going to ask the speakers to just stay where they are, and we're going to come to you. But before we do that, there is one other voice that I want you to hear, which I had meant to play at the beginning, but who knows what happens in the brain. But anyway, you need to hear the voice of John Ainslie himself. So we have a short film of 3 minutes, which I would quite like to play.
Opposition to nuclear weapons isn't just something that comes from the people you'd expect from a sort of hippie fringe movement. It basically comes from all sorts of quarters. And I've been doing that for more than 20 years now, trying to dig out information in the sort of dark recesses of what really goes on in the British nuclear weapon programme. I've more recently been working on, well, what if there was just one nuclear bomb exploded in, say, the centre of George Square? There would be virtually no survivors, which would include places like the City of Glasgow College, include St Clyde University, and then going away south of the river, well out into the West End. So it's a combination. So you've got blast knocking down buildings. You've got immediate bursts of radiation, which is lethal out to about a mile. If you say the wind is blowing from the west, you then have this very lethal area going out to the east end of Glasgow, out to Denison, Camtown. It's normally between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning if they're going through Glasgow. But they're coming along M74, M8, over Erskine Bridge, through on that route, very often going through Stirling and stopping for about an hour in a barracks in Stirling, and then up Lochlowen. They have had 2 nuclear weapons transporters crashing into each other. Pictures recently of the trigger. There is a button that the weapons engineering officer presses on a Triton submarine that actually launches the missile. Now that trigger was very worn when you look at the pictures. The reason it's very worn is they are constantly practicing this. And so when you've got, not just Britain doing that, all these other countries constantly doing that, constantly on edge, we're ready to do this any minute, then clearly there's a potential for something to go wrong. There have been a number of senior military people that have clearly spoken out and said that the Trident is completely useless and there's no point in the modern world, including former Chief of Defence Staff Field Marshal Lord Bramall, General Lord Ramsbottom and General Sir Hugh Beach, amongst others, Commander Rob Green, who's a former Navy nuclear pilot, has been heavily involved in the anti-nuclear campaign. So one of the first things would be for people to say, to actually join the organisation, support the organisation, come along to events. When these nuclear bombs travel along our roads, ordinary people are seeing them and sending messages on Twitter and Facebook and photos and videos, and that's very useful. People will put a pin on the map where they live to say, Scotland is no place for nuclear weapons.
Great. Thank you. Great. So, thank you for that. So now it's open for comments, contributions, questions from people here. And I know there's quite a few activists in the room, but people with any background are welcome to ask or say whatever they would like, really. Who'd like to kick us off? It's always a bit hard to go first, but and it's also quite a hard act to follow John's voice himself, but because it's, you knew the man, it's quite hard watching someone who's no longer with us. Yes, please. And can I get you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind, just so we can get to know each other?
I'll stand up.
Ooh.
I'm Brian Burnell. I work mainly on the south coast. I knew John only online. I never actually met him in the flesh. We worked a lot online, partly because I had easy access to the National Archives in London, whereas he was 400 miles away and found it difficult to get there. So I knew him quite well. But I have an observation for Peter Burton and perhaps his colleague next door, and because someone earlier mentioned the possibility of a Scottish Chernobyl on the Clyde, and that's something that we live with on the south coast, from the French reactors at Flamanville and other places on the Sherwood Peninsula, less than 200 miles from my front door. And these two are almost neighbours too. And yet no one on the south coast seems to be remotely interested, and it's very difficult to raise awareness among them. Really sad. Perhaps Peter can give a better explanation.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Let's try and take a few contributions and come back to that one. Thank you so much for that. Let's see if there's someone else who wants to have some immediate reaction. Yes, please. Please.
Yeah, I'd just like to just remember William Peden as well, because I think he really should be here today, but unfortunately he's not very well. He lives in Amsterdam, but he would have provided John with quite a lot of this information. I worked with him at Greenpeace on the Aldermaston report, which flashed in front. And I'll just tell you a funny story about a trip that we made to Washington. We thought we were starting to look at nuclear weapons as an environmental issue, perhaps for the first time. So we went to Greenpeace in Washington to try and convince them to start doing the same sort of thing. And at the end of our presentation, the guy that ran the disarmament campaign at Greenpeace at the time in Washington said, "Oh, there's no point in us doing that here because Los Alamos is in the middle of the desert." We went outside for a coffee break at the hotel we were having this meeting at, and met a guy who was doing his PhD on the Gallic history of the Appalachian Mountains, and he actually came from Los Alamos and told us that the group there had 2,000 members. So that obviously put power into William's elbow to keep pushing the United States to carry on with a sort of environmental view of nuclear disarmament.
Peter, would you like to introduce yourself and your website, please?
Yes, my name is Peter Roach, and I'm represented in some of the Scram archive material that's on the back page. But I went down to work for Greenpeace in 1991, up until about 2003, during which time I organised various ship visits to the Clyde and worked with John quite closely on those.
And your website? Tell people.
Oh, my website. Still running a website which is sort of the successor to Scram, I suppose, in a way, called No to Nuclear Power, where the 2 is a figure, .org.uk, and there's a lot of the Scram archive is available there as well.
Thank you.
Not to mention your newsletter.
Pardon?
Mention your newsletter.
My newsletter.
Yep.
Daily news appears on the website, and you can sign up to it. Includes some stuff on nuclear weapons, but climate, energy, nuclear stuff as well. And you can sign up and receive it by email every morning if you want.
Thank you. Good. Yes, please.
I'd just like to repeat something that I said at the cross-party meeting, and that's about the fun side of John. He wore this ridiculous costume called Sandy, because he'd never wear the female version. A 9 foot high, as yourself pointed out, a 9 foot high papier-mâché, whatever it was, conglomeration with a big C&D thing on the front. But I let him down when we were canvassing for CND at the independence thing in 2014.
The referendum.
And that was because I was leading him around. But I forgot he was 9 foot tall. But he could only see from sort of like 5 foot up. Well, there are trees there. So what happened is I walked him into a tree, and I'm afraid John lost his head. And it actually petrified this little child, about 4-year-old, who just went, "Daddy, Daddy, that man's just lost his head."
Thank you. And do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Steve Davis,
Thank you.
a guest of ICANN and a member of Scotch CND
Thank you.
and CND.
Great.
Since
Thank you.
God
So-
knows when.
Peter, do you want to answer the question that you were asked, if that's possible, and then we'll come back to the audience again.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure other people, Jane, maybe others on the panel could comment on Brian's question as well.
Yeah, sure.
Pete, thank you as well for your appreciation of William, who, yeah, I'm sure would have loved to be here if he could, and did super work as well on this issue. So it's really appropriate, I think, to mention him as well. And rest of the audience, can I give a really positive and strong and big plug for Pete's No to Nuclear Power website. It's a really good website, great archive material, and the daily newsletter that Pete puts out is certainly for me as a researcher into nuclear issues absolutely indispensable in keeping up with what's going on. So yeah, big hand for Pete. With regards to submarines on the Clyde, like I said, there are probably others who have more to say about this and know more than I do. The issue about Chernobyl and the Clyde is, of course, there are civil nuclear reactors at static points in France and indeed around the coast of the United Kingdom. But on the Clyde, there may be any number of submarine reactors at one time. You know, there have been cases of up to 6 reactors on the Clyde as various exercises take place. At the moment, we know a lot of the Royal Navy's SSNs, the Astute-class submarines, are not able to go to sea because of maintenance problems, because the Trident submarines are given precedence for maintenance. So these submarines are tied up alongside at Faslane. They are therefore the same as any other civil reactor. We also know that foreign submarines visit Faslane. French submarines occasionally, American submarines. There was an American submarine there a couple of weeks ago. The British authorities know virtually nothing about the reactors on those submarines, their design, their kind of safety features, the emergency planning arrangements for those submarines. So were there to be a problem with a foreign submarine on the Clyde, it's very difficult to know what would happen. Would the Americans allow the Scottish Fire Services on board one of their submarines if there was a reactor accident? I doubt it, we just don't know. So this is the kind of issue, these are some of the concerns about, if you like, Chernobyl on the Clyde.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, fine. Okay, so back to you guys. I'm sure there are other thoughts in the audience. Yes. Can we get a microphone back to Isabel? And Isabel, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Isabel Lindsay. I think we must also appreciate John's publication on disarming Trident, because one of the issues that kept recurring in the general debate, particularly among people who said they were opposed to nuclear weapons, they wanted to get rid of Trident. This was particularly so, of course, during the referendum campaign and afterwards, but it would take quite a number of years. And I remember saying to John, we really have to tackle that argument. It takes a long while to get rid of these things, and we'll have to do X, Y, and Z. And he said, I said, can you do something on this? So he went off, he came back and said, yes, we'll do this publication, Disarming Trident. And it's been such a valuable thing because of what he said. Yes, it may take some considerable time actually to get rid of the submarines, to do X, Y, and Z. He said, but you can get rid of the nuclear weapons in a year or two. You simply have to remove them from the missiles, and even on the basis of just transporting them down, just half a dozen or so a month, doing this on a regular basis, we can get rid of these nuclear weapons. And they can be dismantled, of course, down at Aldermast and Burfield. So this was so valuable, just to have that simple thing that I've used time and again, with people said, yes, but we've got to another a decade or so, to say, no, we can do this in a couple of years.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you. Anyone else? Over here. Duncan, you introduce yourself?
Yeah, do you want me to take a few minutes?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, hi. I'm Duncan Campbell. I've known Lynn for 50 years and campaigned for as long on nuclear weapons and civil defence, writing about that extensively in the 1980s and after. I didn't actually work directly with John, but I think it's right to reflect that we're all part of a movement which was here before any of us, and which we should perhaps best honour a member no longer with us by thinking how to take it forward. There are a range of things going on that are different to what they were in the generation in which most of us are active, but which are interesting and extraordinary. One particular thing worth mentioning is that just in a few days, 9 days' time, it is the 40th anniversary of the showing of the BBC film Threads. Now, I was part of the team who wrote the scenario for Threads. Alongside us was Joe Rockblatt, one of the greatest and most distinguished members of the peace movement, founder of Pugwash, but one of 2 members of the Threads team who had actually been part of the Manhattan Project, and who had turned away from it when they realised it was no longer necessary to win the war. Looking forward, there are movements and people out there that I've only become aware of in the last few years, because they're not C&D and they don't quite work the same way. But they have, as Generation Z, motivations. And it is their future, along with all the other threats that they face, that motivate us and must continue motivating us. Quite a lot of them, people are discovering threads. There's a whole series of events, one in Manchester, one of the nuclear free zone movement centres, several others. There's a BBC radio programme on it. And threads embodied some words that I saw up on that screen. I saw several of my own articles come up earlier, but the courage to consider what happens. And that is the failure of imagination in all these people whom we oppose. They never have the courage to consider. And I'll be happy to be called wrong, but I don't think there is any intellectual effort anywhere in the world, other than Threads, that looked scientifically and with integrity and honesty at what happens if you go down the nuclear road through finality. All of the nuclear war plans that Rob and Peter and others and I have unearthed from time to time plan for bunkers or all the nonsense that Thatcher tried to force on us, but none of it would ever work. And they never look beyond 6 months. People describe Threads as the most horrific video ever made. I'm very proud of that. I have to say, when I revisited watching it in the 1990s, it absolutely effing threw me because I'd forgotten what we were going through in the legacy. So that power has not been forgotten, to which person whom we honour today and all of us substantially contributed. We are fellow travellers. We're on the same journey and to the same ends we didn't have to travel together So I'm very, very pleased to be part of the people at Lynn's invitation that are honouring John in that way. Now, there's a lot still going on. The position for Scotland in any nuclear war is far, far worse than was mentioned earlier. Basically, the Central Belt is written off. And that is said with frankness in papers that you can now get from the National Archive. And we've been spending 5 years mining something like 15,000 of them. It should be a huge, substantial revelation. Scotland is basically dead in the event. The whole of the Central Belt will be a high radiation zone simply because of the impacts on the West. And that has been acknowledged secretly since the 1950s. No one tells the people, of course. Quite extraordinarily, it's not just in the Clyde that people in Scotland are still playing a fundamental role in anticipating this happening. I'm sorry I'm going to have to be quiet, I'm a journalist too, but right now there is a war exercise going on that anticipates the firing of Trident as a last resort. And that last resort phrase is quite extraordinary because it takes you to the heart of the absolute abhorrent ignorance and intellectual incapacity of those who advocate Trident. The concept of deterrence is robust in some senses. You can understand the arguments for it. But many of you may have seen, if you follow the journalism, that there are these things on the submarines called the letters of last resort. That every time a new Prime Minister comes in, the journalists dig out the story and how the new Prime Minister is compelled to write in handwriting their choice of what the option to the submarine commanders should be. So they're addressing a situation under the direction of the Cabinet Secretary that the one or two surviving Polaris and now Trident submarines are down there and underwater, they've survived, and there's nothing left of Britain. And that is, in the secret minds of the planet, quite realistic. So the incoming Prime Minister, you can well imagine what Truss might have done, has told by the Cabinet Secretary, well, you have options that you give to the commander. Whether they're paying attention to them seems to be a rather moot question. It's totally symbolic. But one of them is not to fire. Another is to fire them into the ocean. Another one is to go and place the boat under the command of the Australians or the Americans, if any of them survive. And another one is to take the last great act of Great Britain after centuries of colonial legacy, which is to add some more radioactivity to Europe across the Russia and the States. But just come back to one of the options. It's gone wrong. What is the point? They know that. They won't face it. They won't face thinking through what happens after they've done a little bit of nuclear war fighting. And I think there is a role for Rob and others who follow in this outfit to look a little bit more at just how much Trident is not UK and how much it has been put into this extraordinary concept, which is actually 30 years old, of nuclear war. Some of the movements that are worth paying attention to, just watch the people who are coming to threads. They're not all people like us. I'd love to go down to Manchester and see who comes along. But it is people rediscovering threads and then thinking about it, not necessarily going to a CMD. There's another movement called urban explorers, which stands in counterpoint to a lot of what's happening. There's a lot of places that I discovered in the 70s, 80s, or even the 60s, like the Anstruther nuclear bunker or Barnton Quarry, the underground bunkers that would control Scotland. They're being turned into Cold War museums all over the place, and that's good. But there is also another group of people looking at that legacy and trying to uncover what's not being said, and the places that are still going, the urban explorers. They're the new generation, Gen Z, so I'm happy to say that this week I've started working with them on a new project, and I hope they're going to publish a book in a couple of years. I hope to publish another one that will... It shocks even me, because in exposing the kind of lies that we all try to work to expose, there were lies beyond the lies. And basically, the message is that from the first decade in which nuclear weapons were deployed, they had given up any hope of survival in this country, in their heart of hearts. That is why the struggle that you're honouring today must continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm looking at you, Jim. I just wondered if you wanted to come in and say anything. Wait, do you want to take a microphone? It's just, some folk are not hearing well.
My name's Jim Chestnut. I was at the peace camp and worked with John quite a lot of collecting information. We get right back to the 80s and quite possibly before. I was saying to Jane that both of us had been in the army. I had a job when I was in the army in Northern Ireland collecting information. John had a job in the army in Northern Ireland collecting information. So we go back quite a long way, ironically, still doing it. But John, God, he done a lot of work in the office, but any opportunity he got, if we gave him a phone call, there's a sub moving, there's a possible convoy, and he was out the office like a shot. Any chance he could get away, camera and whatever, and we go looking for whatever, it came up. The report that he's talked about cracking under pressure, when we were collecting information for that and looking at these subs were doing patrols. They were normally 3 months. They maybe do a week below that, maybe a week or two above it. I think there was one case even done a 5-day patrol. The subs were that knackered. But they were only doing 3.5 month patrols. Trident just now is double that. So imagine the trouble it's in at the moment. If it's doing double the patrols, they've not got the other submarines fit enough to go out. And we used to, Jane talked about the roof spec, you down to the roof spec. That's where you would go if you wanted really good photographs of submarines. I don't get down there when there's a submarine coming in there, because you get maybe 100 people there, families, waiting for that submarine to come in. And it's really unfair to go and disrupt that, because they're breathing a big sigh of relief that that boat is coming in. There's a whole mental torture game going on just now, and nobody's really talking about it, and that is a big, big issue, and it's not going to get any better, because we're not going to get trying submarines, new ones for about 10, 15 years, operational submarine. I really missed you on this, so good.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. Yes, here, please.
Cheers. Hi there, my name's Rick Lander, and I'm head of research at Friends of the Earth Scotland. And I'm a bit of a troublemaker on some of the more recent things mentioned as well in a personal capacity. But I just wanted to mention that I suppose a sort of intergenerational aspect of this, because I came to Scotland in 2005, 2006, sometime like that, when the Trident renewal was up for debate, and I had actually, I think the very first time I came to Scotland as an activist was to get myself down on the ground in front of the gates at Fastlane, which was a very cold way to be welcomed into the country. But it was quite quickly apparent to me that the long legacy of both direct action, but also this really rich history of campaigning and activism that included at one end, someone spending that time researching this kind of depth, which John obviously brought that, but also that creativity, that taking up space, and that history is very much alive I was involved in helping establish the contemporary version of the Scottish Climate Camp, who were up in Aberdeen this summer supporting the St Fittick's Park campaign. And when we were founding that group, we were learning from the history of the Torness campaign and what happened, the occupations in 1979 and things like that, and wanting to build on that legacy. So, but what I often find in doing learning about these things is that more often than not, I do sometimes find I'm like one of the few younger people in the room, and it sometimes scares me a little bit that there's, and I'm also not very young, it sometimes scares me a little bit that the thread between generations can be so narrow. So I think it's really important for organisations like Friends of the Earth Scotland and CND and Australian Information Services doing this to be to keep renewing this effort to share stories about how we campaign and how we make change. And it's not just about discouraging people from reinventing the wheel. It's really inspiring to hear about how people have done such brave and dangerous and boring and scary and soggy and wet and all of those things campaigning is about. That people have done it before, to take inspiration to that, to make it relevant for the current context and to work to achieve change. And next, Friends of the Earth Scotland did an investigation this summer looking at the history of the anti-coal movement around the 2010s, which I don't think has really been documented before. We'll publish a blog about that next week, so that may be of interest to people. But also just encourage anyone who's interested in doing this kind of storytelling, get in touch with us, and I think there's more collaboration to be done. It's so important to keep putting this alive.
Great. Great, thank you very much for that. And I was there at St Fittick's Park, and I was pleased to be there and to see what an effective organisation Climate Camp actually is, and very glad to be part of it. And we are very keen to have more collaborations with Friends of the Earth Scotland, and had hoped to kind of try to kick-start that at our Festival for Survival in November last year. But it just takes quite a lot of momentum and renewed effort again and again. And so maybe we could have a conversation another time about how to try to build on that a bit more. So thank you for that. Anyone else want to come in? Yes, please. 5 minutes. Yep. Yep. I think maybe, are we kind of in the wind-up phase? Anyone who's not spoken, who would really like to come back in? Or anyone in the panel want a final word? Shall we then just have a general round of applause for our fantastic panel? Thank you, everyone. Thank you. We're finished. Thank you.